Roberto Rocco, and I'm an associate professor of spatial planning and strategy at TU Delft. In this presentation, I introduce the Spatial Justice Package, developed at TU Delft by Hugo Lopes, Juliana Gonçalves, Martin Dombrowski, and myself within the UP 2030 project. The package brings together concepts, models, and tools that help make spatial justice actionable for cities, planners, and communities. Discussing justice in policymaking and urban development is difficult. The term is often abstract, politically sensitive, or fragmented across disciplines. Our goal is to make these conversations clearer, more structured, and more operational. The overarching objective of this work is to provide policymakers, planners, and citizens with a shared language and a robust set of tools. These help them discuss justice in urban development and integrate it into planning processes. We achieve this through a package of concepts, models, tools, and resources. Together, these form what we call the Spatial Justice Package. The Spatial Justice Package consists of 10 elements. These include conceptual models, evaluation tools, catalogs, and publications. Each of them supports a different part of the journey from understanding justice to applying it in practice. This table summarizes the package. Each component has a clear purpose, format, audience, and output. Together, they create a comprehensive ecosystem for integrating spatial justice into planning, policy, and community engagement. Spatial justice means justice for planning or justice for space. It provides a framework that helps us understand how space, society, and the environment interact. It rests on three mutually supporting dimensions: the distribution of burdens and benefits, the recognition of diverse groups and experiences, and the procedures that shape decision-making. Spatial justice gives meaning and coherence to urban development. Without it, planning risks reinforcing existing inequalities. Cities are responding to ecological and social crises with concepts such as the smart city, the resilient city, the circular city, and the 15-minute city. But many of these frameworks lack a justice perspective. Without justice, transition strategies may fail to deliver on their promises and may even fuel new forms of inequality and dispossession, as documented by recent scholarship. Space is never neutral. It is produced through social relations, institutional practices, and power dynamics. Since the spatial turn in the social sciences, we understand that spatial arrangements influence outcomes and opportunities. John Rawls reminds us that no institution, no matter how efficient, should remain if it is unjust. Poor planning deepens inequality. A justice-oriented perspective pushes us to reassess planning choices and their effects on communities. Evaluation is essential. Processes matter as much as outcomes. Evaluation allows us to compare plans, monitor vulnerabilities, highlight burdens, and support just transition policies. Yet, tools for assessing justice in planning have been missing. The spatial justice benchmarking approach fills this gap by combining a conceptual model, an assessment rubric, and a digital tool. A recent literature review shows growing interest in assessing spatial justice. Most studies focus narrowly on distributive justice, with fewer engaging procedural or recognitional dimensions. Methods tend to rely on GIS or composite indicators. This confirms the need for a more comprehensive multidimensional assessment method. The Spatial Justice Matrix offers criteria, recommendations, and references derived from an extensive literature review. It helps practitioners align planning decisions with justice principles. The Spatial Justice Conceptual Model breaks the concepts into actionable components. As an analytical framework, it supports structured assessment of justice levels and reveals the conditions shaping each dimension. It also guides the development of recommendations for just sustainability transitions. The distributive dimension concerns how burdens and benefits are allocated across space. It includes three components: allocation, access, and appropriation. Together, these help assess whether material goods, services, opportunities, and environments are fairly provided, reachable, and usable. The procedural dimension focuses on the governance of space. It highlights democratic engagement, institutional adaptability, and responsive governance. The core question is whether decision-making processes prevent or reproduce inequalities. The recognition dimension concerns respect, visibility, and protection for diverse identities and experiences. It involves validation, care practices, and investment in plurality. Recognition is foundational for justice because planning decisions shape whose needs and experiences are valued. The benchmarking tool evaluates the extent to which justice principles appear in urban plans. It identifies levels of attainment from low to embedded and visualizes results in a dashboard. The tools support reflection, accountability, and continuous improvement. Our central research question asks, how do different cities integrate spatial justice into their urban sustainability transition plans, and how can this be measured? Our methodology analyzes urban sustainability transition plans using thematic coding and qualitative assessment. The process combines the VSOA method and the spatial justice evaluation. The VSOA method identifies values, strategies, objectives, and actions within strategic planning documents. It helps reveal how cities articulate visions and translate them into actions. It also highlights what is missing, particularly regarding justice. Each VSOA coded sentence is then assessed through the spatial justice model, coded by dimension and component. Scores range from -3 for absent justice consideration to +3 for integrated evidence-based justice measures. Components are aggregated into median scores for each dimension. This example shows how a plan may positively address access and validation for older residents, even with limited mentions. Such statements demonstrate attempts to recognize specific groups and ensure their access to amenities. Some scholars argue that cities overemphasize strategies and actions at the expense of coherent long-term visions. Weak alignment between vision and action can lead to maladaptation, fragmentation, and exclusion. The following slides present results from analyzing the plans submitted by partner cities. This is not a comparison between cities, but a demonstration of the methodology using specific documents. These are the plans we analyzed using the VSOA and spatial justice frameworks. We focus here on Belfast and Rotterdam. The analysis combines VSOA coding, spatial justice assessment, and scoring. Belfast's plan is strategy-oriented, with more than half of the coded statements framed as strategies. Rotterdam's plan is action-oriented, with over 70% of statements classified as actions. These patterns help contextualize the justice assessment. This slide shows how vision, strategy, objectives, and actions appear across several cities, highlighting different planning cultures and emphasis. In Belfast, the recognition dimension is absent. Procedural components are balanced, with responsive governance slightly more prominent. Distributive elements focus largely on allocation, with limited attention to access and appropriation. In Rotterdam, fair allocation dominates the distributive dimension, while access and appropriation receive fewer mentions. Procedural justice is more visible, especially through responsive governance. Recognition remains weak, which is problematic in transition planning. These visualizations show the scoring distribution for both cities, highlighting what we think is important. Belfast, the lowest scoring fair allocation for this plan is due to the high focus on emission cutting and a climate neutrality transition. It mentions many times how much it should be cut, but rarely mentions where or who will benefit from these, or a concern for how this transition may burden an area or a group. In Rotterdam, there is a red flag, which is the absence of considerations that focus on two components of the recognition dimension considerations. They are care practices and foster plurality. This provides an immediate score of -3 to each component, in turn lowering the overall score for the dimension. For the other dimensions, the procedural dimensions scores -0.12, and the distributive dimension scores -0.17. A positive example of a concern for fair allocation is the action of encouraging small private initiatives to green up, installing rain barrels, rocking tiles, and small measures in restructuring areas such as Schriewijk. It is an example of a tangible specific group-related relation. Comparison. The recognition dimension is not just mentioned, it is understandable since the plans are mostly about allocation and changing processes. Nevertheless, too little is mentioned regarding validating certain livelihoods, learning from other epistemologies, and the fostering of other cultures. Rotterdam scoring. In Rotterdam, recognition is also weak. Although distributive and procedural components appear, recognition should underpin just transition processes. These booklets summarize each city's evaluation and serve as a discussion tool for policymakers and practitioners. This board is the core of Spatial Justice benchmarking tool. It takes the three dimensions of spatial justice, distributive, procedural, and recognition, and breaks them into 9 components. For each one, we can assess practice from low to embedded. The descriptions help us see whether a policy or vision fairly allocates benefits, engages people meaningfully, adapts institutionally, and recognizes marginalized groups. The goal is not to score cities, but to structure reflection, reveal gaps, and identify concrete improvements. It gives teams a common language to evaluate their work through a justice lens. The justice readiness level is a visual tool to compare how prepared cities are to integrate justice into their planning processes. It supports monitoring over time, helping cities identify where they need to strengthen their capacities, policies, and resources. The TU Delft Spatial Planning Cycle provides a structured process to integrate justice considerations into strategic planning within UP 2030. The TU Delft Strategic Planning Cycle outlines the phases through which cities can integrate spatial justice and sustainability transitions into their planning practice. The cycle is designed to be iterative, evidence-driven, and participatory. It aligns planning actions with justice principles and supports cities in the UP 2030 project as they move from diagnosis to implementation and continuous improvement. Citizen Voice is a transdisciplinary initiative to support meaningful situated participation. It develops methods for capturing forms of knowledge and experience that standard data often misses. The Spatial Justice Handbook compiles all concepts, tools, and practices for researchers, practitioners, and community actors. It is openly accessible. Thank you for your attention. If you have questions or wish to collaborate, feel free to reach out to Roberto Rocco at r.c.rocco@tudelft.nl. This work was developed within the UP 2030 project, which has received funding from the European Union Horizon Innovation Actions. The views and opinions expressed here are those of the authors only. They do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the European Climate Infrastructure and Environmental Executive Agency. Neither the European Union nor the granting authority can be held responsible for any use that may be made of the information here presented.